So friends, as you well know, Donald Trump's corrupt Supreme Court justices tried to put American presidents above the law. Well, President Joe Biden just said, not so fast. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, what happens when the nation's highest court acts unlawfully? What happens when Supreme Court justices abuse their discretion? What happens when the Supreme Court issues a ruling that violates the Constitution? Well, the other two branches of government step up and step in to address the rot at the top, the lawlessness and corruption on the Supreme Court. And President Joe Biden has proposed some fixes that will do exactly that. Let's start with the new reporting. This from the Washington Post. Headline: Biden endorses Supreme Court reforms amendment to limit immunity. And that article begins, President Biden endorsed sweeping changes to the Supreme Court on Monday, calling for 18-year term limits for the justices and a binding enforceable ethics code for the High Court. He is also pushing for a constitutional amendment that would prohibit blanket immunity for presidents, a rebuke of the Supreme Court after it ruled this month that former President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution for official acts. For Biden, who has long resisted calls to reform the Supreme Court, the announcement Monday marked a major shift in his posture toward one of America's three branches of government. Since assuming the presidency, the Supreme Court has veered sharply to the right, overturning Roe v. Wade. Yeah, friends, to expand on that a little bit, that decision involved a handful of radical right-wing ideologues on the Supreme Court revoking women's constitutional privacy rights, deciding that politicians and a handful of judges will be the ones to make reproductive decisions for the women of America, over their objection and without their consent. All my editorial edition. Overturning Roe v. Wade, ending affirmative action in college admissions, weakening federal agencies' power by overturning a 40-year decision, and striking down Biden's student loan forgiveness program. This quote from President Biden, quote, I have overseen more Supreme Court nominations as a senator, vice president, and president than anyone living today, Biden wrote in an op-ed in the Washington Post published Monday morning, quote, I have great respect for our institutions and separation of powers. What is happening now is not normal, and it undermines the public's confidence in the court's decisions, including those impacting personal freedoms. We now stand in a breach. Biden's proposed amendment, which Biden is calling the No One is Above the Law Amendment, states the Constitution does not confer any immunity from federal criminal indictment, trial, conviction, or sentencing by virtue of previously serving as president. In his op-ed explaining his decision, Biden wrote, quote, this nation was founded on a simple yet profound principle. No one is above the law, not the President of the United States, not a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, no one. So yes, that's what you do to address the rot at the top. The rot at the top of our federal judicial branch. That's what you do to address the crime, the corruption, the judicial abuse, the lawlessness of one of our branches of government. You take action. You propose changes, legislative changes, constitutional changes. That's pretty dramatic. A president of the United States proposing, insisting that we need to amend our Constitution so a president is not free to commit all the crimes he wants against the American people with complete impunity and immunity from prosecution, from being held accountable for his crimes. You take action. And friends, I've already heard mainstream media reporting the instant President Biden endorsed these necessary fixes to a corrupt Supreme Court. I heard mainstream media saying, oh, it's never going to happen. This is just messaging. There's no hope that these proposals will actually move forward. Well, first of all, I was a journalism major undergrad. I love the study of journalism. Admittedly, I chose a career in law, a career as a prosecutor, not as a journalist. But when I hear these critically important proposals by President Biden, and I instantly hear mainstream media not reporting what has happened, but instead predicting that it'll never work. How about instead of leaping to that conclusion and predicting rather than reporting, we actually report on the abuses by this runaway, radical, right-wing Supreme Court that is revoking our rights one after another, and enabling a criminal president to commit crimes with immunity against we the people. How about we report on that? We focus on what has happened that has given rise to the need for these, yes, very forward-leaning proposed reforms. And no, they won't be easy, but we don't do them because they're easy. We do them because they're hard and they're necessary. For gosh sakes, if we don't fix the rot at the top, think about it. If we give Supreme Court justices a pass when they issue rulings that violate the Constitution, and the presidential immunity decision violates the Constitution, as some of our top constitutional scholars have said, they in essence amended the Constitution or negated parts of the Constitution. They announced that portions of the Constitution are unconstitutional. If we let a Supreme Court get away with that, well, then there is no telling how many more rights will be revoked or how many more abuses a runaway, corrupt, lawless Supreme Court will perpetrate against we the people. So yes, these fixes won't be easy, but they are necessary if we have any interest in preserving our democracy, in keeping our republic. And I hope mainstream media will report the parade of horribles perpetrated against we the people by a corrupt Supreme Court that has given rise to the necessity of what President Biden just proposed, rather than being in the business of predicting how these fixes will never work. And friends, can I add on a personal note, and based on my personal experience, I encountered judges who ruled in a way that was not supported by the facts or the law. Yes, they ruled in a way that was lawless. I never just threw my hands up and said, oh well, I'll adjust. I'll accept a lawless, unsupportable ruling from the judge and I'll pivot. I'll give up a righteous position. No. We had a term for that in the prosecutorial circles in which I used to work. We called it feeding the monster. You don't feed the monster. And we've got some constitutional cannibals on the Supreme Court. I think it's fair to say we've got some monsters in our midst, right? The rot at the top. And when Supreme Court justices violate the law and the Constitution and abuse their judicial discretion, you don't throw up your hands and say, oh, well, I guess I'll pivot. You fight the monster. You don't feed the monster. Turning a blind eye is feeding the monster, and the monster will continue to take and take and take rights from us if you don't fight them. You fight the monster. How? By proposing legislation, by proposing constitutional amendments. If you're the executive branch, as obviously President Biden and the Department of Justice are part of the executive branch, and President Biden is the head of the executive branch, you open criminal investigations into Supreme Court justices who have violated the law in multiple ways. If you're the legislative branch, the other branch of government, you open impeachment inquiries and investigations, and you don't give up before you ever begin the investigations, whether criminal or legislative, because they might not be successful at the end of the day, because that's feeding the monster rather than fighting the monster. You do the hard work of addressing abuses in the third branch of government. That is the job. That is the responsibility of the other two branches of government. I haven't seen Congress step up and do what is needed, but I'm glad, I'm thrilled to see President Joe Biden step up and announce fixes that are necessary if we care about keeping our republic. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.